The night their grandmother's apothecary side opened like a book, rain threaded the old street with silver. Maya Ward held the keys as if they might bite. Lina, arms tucked in her coat, read the flaking sign above the door, Ward and Daughters. Herbs, tinctures, quiet remedies. Like a line in a poem she wanted to memorize. Tessa, the youngest, kicked the corner of a loose cobblestone and tried to look unimpressed. The solicitor had been blunt at the reading of the will. The shop, the narrow house behind it, and what lies within, passed to the sisters jointly. No price, no condition, only a handwritten addendum from Gran. Unlock the narrow door at 11:11 p.m. under a waxing moon. Bring all three of you. Trust the song. It's 11:13, Tessa said, glancing at her phone as Maya turned the lock. So if this was a magical scavenger hunt, we already failed. Then it's not magical, Maya said, practical even when her voice trembled. It's just ours. The apothecary smelled like dried lemon peel, old paper, and a hint of something metallic, as if the moon had been ground to dust. Shelves lined the walls in a careful, infuriating order Gran never shared. A ladder on rails waited like a sleeping animal. On the counter sat a ledger bound in cracked, indigo leather, latticed with an unfamiliar sigil that looked oddly like three interlocking waves. Lina didn't touch it, not yet. She walked the room, the way she always walked museums, eyes soft, attention taut as a violin string, cataloging without knowing she was doing it. Tessa wandered toward the glass cabinet of bottles labeled salt of pearskin, winter marigold, rainthread, and lamplight resin, while Maya found the narrow door behind the hung bundles of thyme. It opened onto a stair that folded downward in a spiral, iron step swallowing the light. I don't love this, Maya admitted, flicking on her phone's flashlight. Then we'll love it for you, Lina said, and Tessa took Maya's free hand, as if a chain of fingers could keep anyone steady. The cellar was not a cellar. It was a room the size of a chapel, domed in brick, with glass jars filling alcoves from floor to ceiling. In the center waited a table carved with the wave sigil and a brass stand shaped like a music rest. Above them, the dome held a faded fresco of three women in profile, their hair braided together like a river. One lifted a hand. The painted air around her looked rippled. One held a book. The last stood with her palm toward a storm, as if coaxing it to calm. The wards before the wards, Tessa whispered, and surprised herself. She'd never been the reverent one. Maya set the ledger on the brass stand. The sigil warmed under her fingers, then unwound itself into a glyph that sank into the leather like rain into soil. Pages fluttered open to a first entry in a hand they knew, their grandmother's. My girls, if you have found this, the world has not cracked beyond repair. The ledger will read you as you read it. It will name what is already yours. Let it. Do not hurry. The only true magic is kept by the ones who love or refuse to leave. The next line was not written in ink. It rose from the page like breath on winter glass, letters forming themselves. Maya Ward, stillness. Lina Ward, reading. Tessa Ward, flux. Okay, Tessa said, trying for a laugh and landing half a tone lower. Like, hobbies? Not that kind, Lina murmured. Her fingers hovered a hair above the paper. I can feel it, like voices under the ink. Like when you hold a coin and it's warm from someone else's hand. Maya, who had held a stranger's hand as it went cold more than once in her years working as a paramedic, touched the page. The word stillness brightened and the air around her slowed. Rain above became a long note. Dust hung like constellation points. A drop of water paused on the curve of a jar, bead perfect, unwilling to fall. Maya jerked her hand back. Time flung itself forward with a shudder, the drop slid and burst. Lina, pulse racing, laid her palm flat. Reading swelled to meet her, and the room filled with a hush. Then, whispers. Not words exactly, but impressions. A field of poppies sewn into a dress, a brass key under a loose hearthstone, a face reflected in a mixing bowl's curve. She blinked, and images nested in her. This room's making, the careful hauling of bricks, grand whistling to a kettle that always sang back. Tessa swallowed. She reached for Flux, and a thin thrill of laughter rose in her. The brass music rest wobbled. A stack of empty jars on a high shelf leaned and righted. The chandelier shivered, prisms chiming. The thrumming in her bones reminded her of being 12 and jumping the last flight of stairs, sure she could alter gravity by wanting to. The room didn't exactly move. It revised its mind about what movement meant. The frescoes painted women looked almost satisfied. Gran, Maya said to the air. What were you, exactly? The ledger answered where silence might have stood. Waykeeper, brewer, daughter, sister, witch, Tessa repeated, tasting it like a forbidden word, then grinning despite the cold on her skin. We're witches. The glass in one alcove frosted white. A shape crawled across it from within. No, a shadow, a handprint of soot. A sound like ash crackling filled the room. The soot hand pressed from the inside of the jar. Then another. Then a face smeared by the curved glass, like a mask made of chimney dust. Maya grabbed the nearest thing with weight, a mortar. Lina reached for Tessa's wrist without meaning to, unwilling to break the chain of touch. The ledger flipped pages on its own to a diagram of the brick dome with symbols annotated in their grandmother's tight hand. Gallows smoke, the margin read. A remnant. It wants lungs. It hates salt, bells, and names spoken in a chord of 3. Be kinder than it deserves. Return it to what it's trying to be, nothing much. The jar's cork popped like a knuckle. Smoke so black it looked wet poured out, hungry for lungs indeed. It bolted for Maya. She choked, slammed the mortar down in a reflex that struck sparks of stillness from the stone. The air around her hardened like glass. The smoke hit it and furled back. Names, Lina said. The word itself a door opening. In a chord. Tessa's mouth went dry. A what? Together, Maya gasped, tasting smoke and lemon peel. They spoke, not in harmony in any practiced sense, but in the music of siblings who learned how to share air as children. Not Maya Lina Tessa but the names as they lived inside them. May, Lee, Taze. The sound sketched a triangle in the room you could almost see. Tessa's power snapped to the triangle and spun. Lina's reading poured meaning into the sound. Maya's stillness turned the corners to anchors. The smoke shredded around the cord and tore, not like paper but like cobwebs struck by a clean wind. It wasn't destroyed. It was released, collapsing into a handful of gray. Lina, trembling, found a jar labeled salt of pear skin and flung a pinch. The gray dust cleared its throat of malice and subsided into what it had wished to be. Nothing much. The ledger closed by itself with the weary affection of a tired teacher. The fresco seemed brighter. Above them, rain finished a sentence it had been writing on the street. Tessa laughed first, because laughter was the only pressure valve that made sense. Maya leaned her forehead to the cool brass and let her breathing become ordinary. Lina, palms flat on the table, whispered, "We're really going to do this, aren't we?" "We already did," Maya said. "And I think Gran meant us to keep doing it." On the last page that had shown itself, fresh letters lifted like dew. The weir is thinning in the city. Something old is coughing up its name. The ashmaker has woken. Watch the belfry. The what? Tessa asked. The belfry, Lina echoed, already seeing it. The stone, the bell ropes. The way sound could be a weapon or a blessing. She shivered. It's going to start soon. Start? Maya asked. The part of our lives, Lina said, where everything we do matters twice. Renfield's belfry stood like a spine against the sky. No one called it by its patron saint. No one needed to. You heard it as much as you saw it. The tuned weight of metal against morning, the lungs of the city opening when the notes fell. The ledger of echoes was not always direct, but it was never wrong. The next week braided itself with warnings. Birds wheeled strangely around rooftops at dusk. Children woke naming the same nightmare. A man with a soot smile drawing ladders on the air. A printmaker at the market sold images that seemed to shift when you walked past, streets you knew remapped into sigils, bell ropes drawn as veins. The sisters studied. They discovered the ledger was not merely a book, it was a conversation. Touching some passages they felt warmth, approval, a nudge. Other pages remained closed, the ink stubborn as granite. Lina used her reading like a lantern. Maya learned the breath pattern that tasted like friction slowing. Tessa practiced with a line of copper coins on the table until she could send a wave through them that made the fifth coin leap while the others only nodded. They also got on each other's nerves with the intimacy of family. Maya enforcing a rota for cleaning jars as if demons judged dust. Lina composing ritual instructions with the intensity of stage directions. Tessa cracking jokes when fear crowded them, until the jokes, too, felt like smoke. On a Friday that tasted like thunderstorms, they met the first stranger who seemed to understand what they were. He arrived by crow. The bird landed on the apothecary's sign, tilted its head at the sisters inside, and let something fall with a clatter. A small brass bell engraved with 3 small waves. Then it rapped the window with its beak, rude as a debtor, and waited. When Lina opened the door, the crow shook rain from its wings and said, in a voice like a fountain grate, "If you want to keep the belfry, you will need to listen." Tessa shut the door, then reopened it because, well, a talking bird had just spoken. The crow hopped inside, as if insulted by their slowness. A man stepped out of the rain a beat later, coat streaming, hair like black string. He looked like how a library would look if it could take up a human shape. Ink on his fingers, the slouch of a reader, the patience of chairs. He carried no umbrella. He did not wipe his feet. "I am Ari Van Dalen," he said, as if that would settle them. "People who don't know me insist on calling me a wayfinder, which is embarrassing. I prefer librarian, but the word refuses to stretch. The weir is thinning. The ashmaker is a symptom. I can help or I can leave. Either way, could I have tea?" "Crow first," Tessa said, because she liked his nerve. "What's your name?" The crow blinked. "Names are currency. Pay me a small one that you don't need." Tessa considered, then said, "You can have my 8th grade nickname, which no one uses and which I do not miss." It was Tessie Lassie. She grimaced. "Please spend it lavishly." The crow hopped once, satisfied. "I shall be Lassie for the day, then." It looked at Ari. "You will ruin their rug." "We don't have a rug," Maya said, half to the bird, half to herself. "Exactly," Lassie said, and tucked one wing. "Drink tea, Van Dalen." "Explain the weir." Ari did. The weir, he said, was less a wall than a woven fence between the ordinary and everything else. It flexed with city seasons, the tide of human attention, the weight of stories, How often people remembered to throw salt over their shoulders or tie a red ribbon on a bicycle handlebar. Sometimes the weave snarled, sometimes it frayed. The ledger kept, among other things, the family's share of the Weir's repairs. The ash maker? Lina asked. A revenant who learned craft, Ari said. There are things that just are, and things that learn. The ash maker learned to write with absence. It burns away the thing that makes a person most themselves, leaves the rest walking. That hollowness is useful ink for certain sorts of ladders. Ladders? Maya asked. Between rooms that should not touch, Lassie said, pecking a droplet of tea from the rim of Maya's cup. Between this city and the salt below. Between a bell and a mouth. Is the belfry a door? Lina asked, already knowing. Only if someone draws the hinges, Ari said, and set the brass bell the crow had brought on the counter. This is a keepsake from a bell that broke mending a breach decades ago. It prefers to belong to you. You say that like it has opinions, Tessa said. It has more than some people, Ari said mildly. Will you let me help? Maya checked his eyes the way she checked pupils after an accident, for dilation, for lies. She did not see deceit. She saw the particular fatigue of someone who had spent years being the second call for disasters, the quiet department that answered when the loud one failed. She nodded. But if you betray us, my gift will fail me exactly once, and that once will not be you. That seems fair, he said, and surprisingly, smiled. Do you sing? Tessa laughed. Only badly. In the shower. Do you do anything together on purpose? Ari asked, without malice. Lina looked at her sisters and found the true answer. We eat. Late. After shifts. On the back steps. Then we'll begin there, Ari said. Your chord doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to be honest. They practiced, not notes. The sisters refused to perform for the room, but breath. Ari had them say their names as if the city might forget them, and they were correcting it. He showed them how breath can anchor, how the chest's movement can be a metronome, how to find the tiny moment before sound happens and live there like a fox in a hedge. The first time they tried the chord with intention, the apothecary light changed. It thickened, the jars hummed, the brass bell warned, the ledger's sigil lifted, a skyline of waves. That will do, Ari said. Now we go to the belfry. They went at dusk, because of course they did. The belfry keeper met them on the stair, a reed-thin woman with clockwork tattoos of bell shapes snaking around her wrists. She looked at the crow on Tessa's shoulder and didn't flinch. We've been waiting, she said. Something keeps tying the clappers with soot. We don't keep soot. You keep echoes, Lassie said. Soot likes those. They climbed. At the landing, the air smelled like thunder. A rope hung limp. The bell above it was a mouth in a long scream. On the interior of the tower wall, lines of ash had been drawn. No pattern at first glance, but the ledger in Lina's mind turned the lines and the lines turned back into a ladder she did not want to climb. Dragon frame, Ari murmured. 7 rungs. Whoever drew this wants the sound of this bell to open to the salt below. How many more ladders stand in the city, I wonder? Too many, Maya said. She set her hands against the air. Her stillness kissed the dust and said, wait. Tessa discovered she could push not just coins but intention. She flung a thought at the bell like a pebble at a pond. Don't toll for that. The bell thrummed, low, approving. Lina did the thing she was best at, she listened to the tower. She lay her palm on the ash and read not the smut but the hand that left it. A man who smelled like cold fireplaces and frightened himself each time he succeeded. A rhythm in his wrist of counting, always, always, a name he had not earned, Ashmaker. And the shadow of another that wore him like a glove, Thorn Queen. Not just a revenant, Lina said. A revenant with a boss. Thorn Queen, Ari repeated, distaste at the epithet. An old salt monarch. They rusted under harbors and woke wrong. They like ladders. Then we kick the ladder down, Tessa said. Not kick, Lassie said. Untie. You don't want the ash falling wrong. They worked. Maya held the air firm so the ash did not sift into their lungs. Lina found the knots in the drawing and breathed their names until the charcoal gave up. Tessa sent a wave through the rope that convinced its fibers they had once been river reeds and would listen to current instead of soot. Ari rang the small brass bell in patterns, 3, 5, 13, and the big bell answered without moving, sound vibrating in the bones of the stone. When the last rung unhooked itself from the wall, the tower exhaled. A wind rose from nowhere and blew the ash through the open slats into the evening. Down below, the canal took the gray into itself. It looked like ordinary dirt in the water. Lina refused to be fooled. Dirt remembers. The ledger warmed in the satchel at Maya's hip. A new line wrote itself against her thigh. Return to the shop. Salt the threshold. The ash maker will knock before dawn, wearing what used to be a man. Great, Tessa said, throat tight. Hospitality for a hollow. We set the table, Lina said, voice steadier. Not for him. For us. They went home in the rain's hush. They salted the threshold and the backstep and the sills. They set the brass bell on the counter and the ledger on the stand. Maya brewed tea because doing nothing is worse than doing the wrong thing. Tessa peeled oranges because the smell reminded her of summers when fear had no name. Lina opened Grand's drawers and found, in the third one, a matchbox with 3 matches left. Written on the wood in their grandmother's neat hand, only together. He knocked at 4:03 a.m., which felt ruder than midnight. He wore an overcoat. He wore a face that had once been gentle, pale now with ash. He wore his wedding ring. His eyes looked like coins that had been used too long. Please, he said, and Maya heard 2 voices. The remnant playing at mercy and a thread-thin real plea underneath. Help me. Come to the line, Maya said, and her voice, which had talked strangers through breathing in ambulances and talked sisters down from edges, did not shake. Stand there. He did. Lassie watched from the sign. Ari stood quiet behind the counter, hands open. Lina found the man's name under the ash, Rian. She said it softly, so that the ash maker might not know it wasn't its own name. Tessa raised her hand. The ledger, pages quivering, cord of 3. The lattice breath. Untie where it hurts. They breathed. They spoke. The sound sketched the same triangle, not of command but of welcome. Ash sloughed. It didn't want to, it loved what it could do, but it sloughed. The hollow inside Rian complained in a voice like a stove's last heat. I am needed, it said. I am building, she asked. She can ask better, Tessa said, and felt flux move through her words into the air. We are louder. Maya set stillness around Rian so the bad wouldn't run and hide and sharpen itself for later. Lina read the knot where the ash maker had tied himself to this body and found the weak thread. An old lullaby, sung once to a baby in a one-room flat. Sleep, she whispered into the knot. Sleep the right way. It took time. Magic, Gran had written, does. We all want it to be quick because fear is loud. But fear is also impatient. Binding is patient. Untying requires the patience of people who would rather be tired than wrong. When the last twist came loose, the ashmaker left Rian like gray breath, and Lassie lifted one wing and cupped the nothing, which is the only right vessel for a remnant. The crow hopped to the door and shook its wing, and the gray went into the dawn. Rian cried, exhausted. He touched his own throat as if surprised it was still his. How, he managed. Not how, Maya said. Why? Because you asked. He left with Ari, who would find him a doctor who did not ask inconveniently mundane questions. The sisters cleaned. Dawn ran its hand over the jars. The bell purred. When the shop doors opened at 10, a woman came in for winter marigold and left with a better posture because Tessa told her a joke too good to carry slumped. Lina wrote 3 words on the inside of the ledger's cover, where Gran had listed first principles. Listen, untie. Together. By afternoon, word had gone round that the Ward sisters' apothecary smelled even better than it used to, because it smelled like someone living there breathed on purpose. At dusk, Lassie said, the Thorn Queen will not be pleased. Queens seldom are, Tessa said, when someone kicks their ladder. You will need to climb something, the crow warned, before the end. Then we practice stairs, Maya said, and set a kettle to sing. If part 2 had been a lesson, part 3 was a test. The city recognized its witches. It did not let them be bored. The first sign was the water. Not a flood. Renfield had seen its share and knew how to build for it, but a wrongness. The canal closest to the apothecary began to behave like a mirror that had opinions. Reflections lagged. You turned your head and found your face still staring back a heartbeat too long. Children mocked their second selves. Adults avoided the water's edge. Dogs growled as if each ripple were an impolite stranger. Lina stood on the stone and read the ripple. It said, I'm a door. Ask me to be a door. Rude, Tessa said, flicking a copper coin out over the slow surface and grinning as her flux convinced the coin it could skip 7 times instead of 4. The coin obeyed and then didn't return to the right now. It sank like a yes. Don't feed it, Maya said. If it wants, we don't give. That's the rule for bullies and doorways. They traced the wrongness back to the Belfry by way of signs the city left for those who had agreed to see. A sequence of chalk marks on alley corners that, under Lina's fingers, sang a children's counting rhyme that became coordinates. A cat with one white paw sitting on a windowsill and pointing its nose in the right direction each time Tessa bowed to it in gratitude. A smell of salt under the wind even though the harbor was miles away. At the tower, the bellkeeper looked flayed by sleeplessness, but her mouth still found humor. If you came to ask whether anything is wrong, she said, the answer is yes, but I don't have time to be right about it. Inside, soot returned in new shapes. Not ladders now, but circles overlapping like lenses. Ari, who had a headache he refused to admit to, rubbed his brow and said, he's been promoted. The ash maker? Maya asked. To foreman, Ari said. Lenses bend. He means to bend sound. He means to focus the bell into a cut fine enough to open what shouldn't open. Thorn Queen, Lina said, and the name tasted like iron filings. What does she want? Whatever she was promised under the harbor, Lassie said, landing on Lina's shoulder. Salt monarchs remember promises like other beings remember kisses. They are equally dangerous. The sisters split the way they always had in childhood when a problem was larger than any single pair of hands. Maya went to the rope and found the breath that could steady an entire crowd's panic. Lina went to the soot circles to read the hand that made them and watch for where it trembled. Tessa went to the bell, because the bell sounded like a dare. Up close, the bronze looked like tree bark, each casting mark a growth ring. Tessa pressed her palm to it. Her flux moved outward eagerly, a dog let off a leash. The bell did not move. The idea of it shifted, like a sentence cleared its throat. I'd like to toll wrong, the bell confessed, voice deep as harbor water. No, Tessa said gently. You'd like to toll for everyone who needs you. That's not wrong. That's just bigger than usual. The bell considered. Flux carried the consideration across Tessa's skin as a shiver. Bigger, the bell agreed. Then bigger, Tessa said, and felt the grin she wore in every high bad moment. Let's be loud in the correct direction. Ari set the small brass bell at the foot of the rope, and it responded to the big bell the way a violin responds to a cello when both are played by someone who loves them. Lassie hopped up onto the beam and gripped wood hard enough to hurt. When this begins, the crow said, the ash maker will try to get out of his foreman's pay. He will want to be paid in people. Keep your eyes on yourselves. He arrived when sound did. He came not as a man this time but as an idea in a man-shaped absence. If you looked at him, your eyes watered the way they do near a wood stove. He stood in the soot circles and became sharper and blurred at once. Stop, he said. If you undo this, she will be angry. Maya answered the way she answered drunk men who tried to climb into her ambulance to demand free rides. We're busy. You will make it worse, he said, and for a heartbeat a real grayscale worry crossed his knot face. She will notice. Good, Tessa said. I hate to be ignored. He moved fast, faster than smoke. He reached for Lina because reading hands threatened him most. Maya's stillness caught his reaching and made a pocket of slowed air around him. He pushed into it like a swimmer into a cold lake. Tessa slid Flux under his idea and tipped him. The soot circles grabbed his feet in admiration, then let go because Lina asked them to. Who taught you, please? The ashmaker asked Lina, curious as a knife. My grandmother, Lina said, and pressed her hand to her own sternum where fear had built a hive. She read her fear like a map and folded it smaller. And my sisters. The tower itself had a say. The stones remembered every storm. The bell remembered every solstice. The rope remembered every palm. They were not passive. When the chord came, names spoken on one breath, 3 notes none of them could have sung alone, the tower made a choice. It offered itself as a cut, it offered itself as a bandage. Tessa's flux ran through the stones and made a wave. The wave met Maya's stillness and made a shore. Lina laid the ledger open to the page where Gran had recorded a spell called the Honest Toll. It wasn't an incantation so much as a method. Ring the bell without moving it. Ring it in everything within reach of your voice. The ashmaker tried to bend the sound through the soot lenses. The bell refused. The little bell laughed. Lassie shouted an obscenity in crow. When the sound passed through the lenses anyway, it did not open the Weir downward. It opened people upward. It made those who heard it stand straighter because something had rung inside them and found they were not hollow. It cut the ties the ashmaker had made where they were smallest. It found the counting itch in his wrist and soothed it. It told the soot, "You are fuel, not foundation. Be ash. Go away." He went, resisting like rain resisting falling back into a cloud. He left a smear of absence in the air that made the edges of things look too sharp. He would return, absence is persistent. But he was not so sure of his employer now. The Thorn Queen, wherever Salt kept her, felt the failed hinge and turned her head. "She sees you," Ari said afterward, pale with how headachy the Weir felt. "We need to move before she moves, and I hate that. Moving first is how people fall downstairs. Then we choose the stairs," Maya said. "Tell us where." "Under the city," Lina said, before Ari could. She spread the ledger on the dust-swept stone and turned to a folio Gran had marked with a pressed bit of kelp. "There's a salt chapel, built when the harbor first surged into being. The Thorn Queen sleeps under its roof of ribs. The Weir thins there at springtide. Tomorrow night is springtide. Tomorrow, Tessa repeated, and for once did not grin. No time to be clever. Which is sometimes a mercy, Maya said. She touched both her sister's shoulders. Stillness ran through them like a level put to a shelf. We prepare. We go together. We come home. Gran wrote a binding suitable for monarchs, Lina said, tracing ink with a fingertip. It asks 3 things of the ones who speak it. Tell the truth, keep the truth, and give up one thing you're tired of pretending. Tessa blew out a breath. That last one is mean. Mean and required, Lassie said. Salt monarchs respect meanness that keeps people alive. They prepared with the ordinary tasks that make extraordinary work possible. Packing bread and flasks of tea, braiding hair out of faces, writing the names of loved ones on paper and tucking them into pockets for luck. Ari found 3 small knotted cords in his coat. He never knew where useful things came from. They found him and handed them over. Tie these around your wrists when you speak the binding. They will remember for you if your mouths forget. Thank you, Maya said. You knew Gran? Lina asked suddenly. He had moved around the ledger like someone who had been scolded by it before. Ari's mouth pinched. We were co-workers, he said. She bossed me about and I was grateful and resented it simultaneously, which is what you want from a professional relationship when saving cities. Did you love her? Tessa asked, too blunt, too kind. Ari looked at the rope. Yes, he said, and folded the word like laundry. But not the way that would have mattered. He left before anyone had to say something gentle. Lassie pecked Tessa's ear. You are brave the way cliffs are brave, because you stand. I don't feel brave, Tessa said. I feel like I want to throw up. That's adjacent, the crow said, kindly. Sleep if you can. Tomorrow, the water will ask you what you are. You should have an answer ready. The entrance to the salt chapel hid itself in the everyday as all good secrets do. Behind a rusted grate in a culvert under the east lock, where the canal's throat narrowed before opening to the harbor. At low tide the stones sweated. At high tide they swallowed. Spring tide would ask the lock to remember being a mouth. They went an hour before the turn, boots sliding on slime, rope looped through belts, salt in pockets. Ari walked ahead with a lantern whose flame preferred not to smoke. Lassie scouted, a black punctuation mark in the wet air. The ledger thumped against Lina's hip like a heartbeat that wasn't hers but had an opinion about how often to beat. The chapel did not look like a church, not at first. It looked like a cave that had learned geometry, ribs arcing overhead, salt crystals hoar frosting every surface. The floor wasn't a floor so much as tamped sand impressed with old footprints. An altar lurked where you'd expect. It wasn't stone, it was the bow of a wrecked boat, set upright, its keel a spine. Someone had carved a crown onto it long ago and then tried to erase the crown. You cannot erase what salt loves. You can only offer it other loves. She's here, Lina said, because she could feel a tension like a hand on the back of her neck. The Thorn Queen rose the way a tide rises. Not all at once, but in a series of no arguing steps. She wore herself in the shape of a woman grown from sea wrack and rust. Her hair dripped. Her teeth were those of a fish or a saint's reliquary, beautiful and wrong. Her eyes were pools with coins at the bottom. When she spoke, everyone's mouths tasted brine. I remember your grandmother, she said. She was inconvenient and exact. I prefer you. You don't know us yet, Maya said, and set stillness in her voice so fear would have to climb over it to be heard. You are younger, the queen said, as if that were a virtue or a flaw. You have more to lose. People with much to lose bargain well. Let us bargain. Give me the bell. Give me the belfry. I will make a door and make your city rich. Wealth is grace for the ordinary. You will make it hollow, Tessa said. It wasn't an accusation, it was a weather report. You will ask it to toll for you and not for itself. I am an old thing, the queen said, and if there was weariness there, it was the weariness of a coastline. The weir was strung over me like laundry. I resent that. Lina, who had spent childhood resenting rules and growing up understanding some rules are the floor you stand on, lifted the ledger. It offered her the binding Gran had left. Not words but a braid of meanings, three-stranded, practical as bread and sharp as winter air. Truth first, Maya said, and they tied the cords around their wrists. She looked at her sisters and spoke the truth that had gnawed at the edges of her patience. I pretend I don't need help because I am afraid help will see the parts of me that are not competent and will leave. I am tired of pretending that. I want to be helped and stay needed. Lina swallowed. Truth made her throat tight. I pretend I understand everything if I can name it. I don't. Sometimes I only know the shape of the not knowing. I am tired of pretending I am safe when I can define the edges. I want to be held even when I can't read the map. Tessa, whose jokes were ropes, took a breath big enough to fit fear through. I pretend this is all a game because I am small and the world is big. I am tired of pretending everything is funny before it has the right to be. I want to be taken seriously and still be kind. The ledger quivered approval hard enough to lift the fine hairs on their forearms. Ari, who had not been asked for his truth but who brought it anyway like a decent guest, said quietly, I pretend I am only a librarian. I am not. I am also afraid and in love with my city and angry at Salt and proud of you. I am tired of pretending I am furniture. Lassie caught a word in Crow that meant, approximately, amen. Second, Lina said, steadying, we keep the truth. She tied the braid tighter. Third, Maya said, we speak. They did not chant. They did not rhyme. They spoke the names of what they loved and of what they would not let be eaten. They named the belfry and the printmaker and the cat with the white paw, the children with the counting rhyme, the canal when it behaves and when it doesn't, the way Tessa's laugh repairs rooms, the way Lina's hands catalog grief without dropping it, the way Maya can make a crowd calm, the way Tide makes docks honest. The Thorn Queen listened the way weather listens to a coastline, expectant and insulted and half in love. The Ashmaker tried to slip between their ankles like spill smoke. Maya's stillness hardened underfoot to bedrock. Tessa's flux ran up the ribs of the chapel and convinced them they were bell frames. Sound would ring here on their terms, not the Queen's. Lina read the knots in the Queen's name and found, at the core, a promise made to her when harbors were born. You may keep the low places if you keep them safe for fish and wrecks and the heavy sleep of the drowned. The Queen had not kept it. She wanted more than her bargain had bought. Contracts matter to monarchs. Lina tugged the old promise until it showed. You were given a kingdom, Lina said. You were not given ours. I was given a mouth, the Queen said, salt fizzing. Let me eat. I will not let you, Maya said, and the truth made her shoulder ache and her voice vast. You may call that arrogance. We call it keeping the floor. The water rose around their boots. Ari's lantern hissed and went brighter. Lassie opened both wings. The Queen reached, and this reach was not metaphor. It was a hand of tidewater heavy with knives of shell. It came for the ledger because that book had denied her once already and she wanted a different ending. Tessa met the hand with flux. She did not shove. She redirected. Go around us, she said, and the water, rude, royal, did. It curled like a cat forced to detour and kept climbing. Maya set a dome of slowed air over the four of them, thin as membrane, tough as truth. "Breathe," she said. They did. Lina found the final stitch in the binding, the place where Gran's handwriting had gone a little crooked as if she were laughing. "To bind what is older than manners," Gran had written, "use the manners that predate it. Feed it. Memory is a diet. Give it a better one. Feed her," Lina said, and turned to the altar that had been a bow. It had eaten wrecks and salt. It had swallowed prayers and coins tossed for luck. It had learned to taste hope. She laid the ledger on the wood, open to the city's first spring tides, the first bridges, the first songs fishermen sang when they were cold and lied about being warm. She read those entries aloud, voice thick and bright. The queen shuddered, because stories make even monarchs hold still long enough to remember they are not the only story. Tessa spoke over Lina. "Silly details, yes, and the right ones. The baker who whistles wrong and nobody minds. The woman who unlearned how to be afraid of stairs. The boy who draws superheroes on math homework and becomes one only on Tuesdays." Flux carried these crumbs into the queen's mouth. She tasted them instead of the bell. Maya did the last thing. She put her hand on the queen's wrist, not skin on skin, but truth on tide, and did what stillness is for. She asked the moment to hold. Not stop, not die, not freeze. Hold, between wanting and taking, between needing and hurting, between the old promise and the new greed. It held. The room flexed around that holding, a lung at the top of a breath. Ari rang the small bell. The ribs rang back. The ledger's ink rose and braided itself into a thin white rope that smelled like winter marigold and lamplight resin. The rope looped the queen's wrists, not cruel, sure. Lina spoke the promise back to her like a law. "Keep the low places," she said. "Keep them for what needs them. Sleep there. If you wake for hunger, wake for fish. Wake for wrecks. Wake for drowned names and give them back quiet. You may not wake for ladders." Her voice sharpened. "Not here." Tessa tied the end of the rope in a knot only Flux could tie, the sort that never tightens to pain and never loosens to harm. "Stay," she said, not to command but to invite. "Be the part of the sea that knows to wait." Maya let her hand fall. The held breath in the chapel exhaled. Water dropped like shoulders after a long argument. The queen looked at her salt-bound wrists and laughed once, the sound of a wave acknowledging a rock. "You are inconvenient," she said, with the faintest echo of fondness. "You are exact. We learned from the best," Tessa said, and the ledger warmed as if Gran had passed a palm over it from wherever exact women go when they die. The ashmaker tried, one last time, to leave payment in people. He reached for Ari because librarians look like rooms and rooms are easy to make hollow. Lassie hit him with both wings, which is an indignity revenge itself respects. Ari, who had been furniture for long enough, lifted his own hands, not magic, just hands, and caught the soot. It didn't know what to do with being held by an ordinary man who refused not to matter. It sloughed. It went where nothing much goes. When it was done, the rope of story sank into the queen's wrists and became a cup of salt that reflected whatever light was offered. She blinked at the sisters as if waking from a nap that had gone too long. "I will sleep," she said. "Wake me if someone makes a promise to the sea and then breaks it. I like those. I get to be angry for others." "That seems right," Maya said. "Rest." They left as the tide turned, which is always the right time to leave anywhere. Outside, the lock blinked in the sun like an eye. The canal ran past as if it had always meant to and had only paused to comment. Back at the apothecary, customers came in, because life goes on. A woman asked for a remedy for her daughter's stage fright. A man wanted something for a colicky dog. Tessa sold them tins of calm and a small brass bell charm, for luck, and told them to hum before talking. Maya bandaged a split knuckle and told its owner he'd be fine because she had decided he would be. Lina wrote labels with steadier hands than she expected. Ari stood in the doorway, drenched, smiling in the lopsided, terrified way of those who have seen a city almost fall and then not. "You have an apothecary," he said, as if he had only now believed it. "You have a belfry. You have a queen sleeping under your lock with her wrists politely salted. You have a ledger that loves you. You have a crow who will insult you when needed. Lassie preened, frequently needed, and you have tomorrow," Ari said. "Which is a ridiculous thing to have, and I recommend it." They waited that night for the city to tell them what it had thought of their work. Cities approve in silly ways. No parade, no medals, only a good parking place, a warm wind, a busker finding the exact song you had in your chest without knowing it. The belfry tolled without ladders. The water reflected properly. The baker whistled wrong. It was enough. Before closing, Maya tucked something into the ledger. A note on a torn receipt. "We kept the floor, Gran," she wrote. "We told the truth. We came home." Lina added, beneath, "If the Weir thins again, send a sign. We're not going anywhere." Tessa drew 3 little waves and, beside them, a cat with one white paw. Lassie, uninvited, took the pen and scratched a crow foot mark that looked like a signature. Ari set his palm on the leather, not writing, just promising. After the lights were out, in the hush that feels like a hand on your head, the ledger breathed a small glow and wrote one more line all by itself in a hand that knew them and made no fuss. Season 1 concluded. Season 2. To be announced by Weather and Need. Sleep now, my girls. They did. And outside, in the city they had chosen and that had chosen them, wind shouldered the belfry, the canal rehearsed being ordinary, and under the lock a queen slept with salt bracelets and the particular smile of someone who has been told the rules and, for now, has agreed.